Myanmar's military leader says more than 2,700 people are now known to have died after Friday's devastating and powerful earthquake. Exactly 4 days after the quake struck, a minute's silence was observed in the country where relief teams are struggling with a growing humanitarian crisis. There are calls for the military junta to allow immediate and unfettered access to humanitarian aid and also for them to lift any restrictions that might be impeding the emergency response. Fire services in Naypyidaw say a woman has been rescued. It's been 91 hours since she's been trapped under the rubble. But hopes of finding many more survivors are fading fast, not just in Myanmar, but also here in Thailand. These are live pictures that we're seeing right now. This is probably a familiar sight if you've been following what's been happening in Thailand. The skyscraper that was brought down under construction. The governor of Bangkok saying the city's designation as a disaster zone, which was given after the earthquake, has now been lifted. They were braced for aftershocks. They had them as well, but they now say there is no state of emergency now. It's no longer a disaster zone, but they're really concerned, obviously, about those that remain trapped under this rubble of a skyscraper. We're going to be live in Bangkok shortly with Nick Marsh, who was just saying really there are no real opportunities to find anyone living under the rubble anymore. We'll take you live to Bangkok in a moment, but to remind you, international journalists have not been allowed to report from Myanmar. The BBC does have a Burmese service which reports from inside the country for the people there, and they sent us this report from Mandalay.
On the road to Mandalay, the town of Chao Se is just 30 miles from the epicenter of Friday's quake. This nursery used to teach 70 children, some of the youngest victims of this disaster. Many children on the second floor of the building escaped, but 12 of the smallest, who studied on the ground floor, died together with a teacher. The Tarzan was 5 years old. Her grandfather Chue Nyin has come to where she died to invite her soul to come home with him, a Buddhist ritual for those who die suddenly. He tells us that he had a strange feeling that morning and wanted to tell his daughter not to send his granddaughter to school, but he didn't. As the quake hit at lunchtime, the little girl's mother ran to the school to find her. Chue Nyin says they searched together for 3 hours until they found her body. He knew she would be dead, but he still wanted to find her, and he is relieved that she was still in one piece. Dokhin's son is a teacher from the next door school. She was injured during the quake.
I was sleeping when it happened. My older son came to wake me up and said, "Come, Mom, it's an earthquake." I heard the noise bang, bang, bang as I was running out. Because I was half asleep, I didn't know it was a quake. Once I was outside, I looked back and this building had already collapsed.
Chao Se is just one of many towns affected by the quake. But here, the loss of so many young lives has been particularly devastating. So Wintan, BBC News.
And we'll talk more about humanitarian aid in Myanmar shortly, but let's update you on what is happening in Bangkok and take you straight there and join our correspondent Nick Marsh. Nick, the Bangkok governor has lifted the city's designation now as a disaster zone, saying that many people's lives have returned to normal. But still, that is quite a scene of devastation still behind you with that building that has collapsed. We've been following it for a number of days now. But what is the latest from the authorities about what is happening there?
Well, we're coming to the end of day 5 of this operation that you can see behind me, Lucy. The vast majority of the time that we've been here, and we've spent a lot of time here now, it was a search and rescue operation. The mood was hopeful that survivors could be found. I think today's the first day that the mood, the tone of the authorities has really shifted, and now it is essentially a search and recovery operation. We do see from time to time bodies being retrieved. There have been 14 confirmed deaths here underneath this mountain of rubble. That was supposed to be a new government office which came down on Friday. But what the authorities are saying now is that the dozens who remain buried under there have very, very little chance of survival.
Nick, thank you so much for that update from Bangkok. Well, let's return now to the humanitarian operation in Myanmar. We can join Richard Blewett, who is the Executive Director for the British Red Cross for their international arm. Very good to have you with us, Richard. We're seeing many aid agencies now and others call for unfettered access to Myanmar. How much are your teams managing to achieve, and how much access do they have?
So the Myanmar Red Cross, had access prior to the earthquake. They with the ICRC, they had warehouses in the affected area. They responded with mobile medical units, the provision of blood, and they participated in the search and rescue operations that still are going on. But probably we're at the last few, days or day of that scope operation. Our major concern is 18.3 million people are in the affected area. And many of them are already very vulnerable. They're vulnerable because they're food insecure. They're vulnerable because of the internal conflict. And therefore, the earthquake now is going to make the operation very, very challenging. Access to clean water, it's 44 degrees, so very high temperatures. And so we face many challenges now to sort of respond effectively and scale the operation.
So many people sleeping out in the open as well, Richard. Shelter is obviously a key concern, and doubly so with the monsoon approaching too, I imagine.
Yeah, there's a major worry. The waterborne diseases, what's happened to the existing very weak water infrastructure is a big challenge. We've got to make sure there's sufficient temporary shelter given the monsoons coming. And so temporary relief camps are being set up by the Myanmar Red Cross and other humanitarian actors on the ground. But the key is to get to scale. Ongoing assessments are happening because obviously getting to all the affected areas takes time. But I'm convinced that a major relief operation that meets the needs can be launched, but we need the funds. Prior to the earthquake, the humanitarian efforts in Myanmar were only 5% funded. So there's a massive gap in terms of meeting needs. And we really appeal to the international community to really reach in beyond the search and rescue now to the real structural challenges that people are going to face as a result of this horrific earthquake.
Once you get the aid and the supplies, though, Richard, and let's hope you do, are you able to get it in easily into the country and to where it's needed?
There have been historic delays getting it in, but we're convinced that those will be eased. I worked in the response to Cyclone Nargis. I led the assessment in Myanmar. And at that time, the authorities let the humanitarian operation move to scale. That has to happen again. They have to enable the operation to move to scale to meet the pressing needs because the whole system is completely overwhelmed. The hospitals are overwhelmed, the clinics, how to ensure basic access to water, how to shelter millions of people in the coming weeks. That will need a flow of aid that has to be significantly ratcheted up. But that said, the Myanmar Red Cross and other local actors are doing ongoing relief efforts that do make a real difference. The key now is to get behind their efforts to enable them to scale.
Richard, good luck with your work, and thank you very much for joining us, and to your teams on the ground, of course, too.